Hello, everyone. My name is Dario Harris. I am with the Johns Hopkins Center for Livable Future. We called everyone here today because we are in partnership with the USDA. We wanted to tell you about the 2501 program. And so the 2501 program is an opportunity that food policy councils in the past have taken advantage of. They have a swath of funding, and so we wanted to encourage you to apply and to ensure that you knew about it. And so for our agenda today, we're going to have Alex Cordova kind of introduce us to the USDA and welcome us to this presentation. We are going to have a presentation on the program from Cherie Lesh. And then we'll have a Food Policy Council Executive Director, Jim Hanna, come and talk to us about his application and decision to apply for the program last year and how the funding has impacted his council in his area. Then we'll have time for questions and discussion, and then we will have Margaret Campbell from the USDA Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production come to talk about the services that are available through that office. And then we'll have another opportunity for questions and discussion, and then we'll close. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Alex Cordova from the USDA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Daryl and Karen and the rest of the Center for Livable Future team for your partnership. And thanks to all the attendees for taking the time to join today. My name is Alex Cordova. I'm a Community Development Specialist at USDA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. The USDA Center essentially provides outreach, technical assistance, and support to faith and community-based organizations across the country as they seek to work with USDA in all of the tremendous work that they all do in their communities. So this means cutting through some of that bureaucracy, facilitating connections to our subject matter experts, providing more information about resources and programs that are available to support your work. So today we are really excited to feature the Outreach for Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers Grant Program out of the Office of Partnerships and Public Engagement. And as Dario mentioned, I'm excited to also highlight some of the innovative work that our urban agriculture team is launching in various places across the country. I also wanted to quickly note and just say that we're hoping that this can be a long-term relationship, that we're seeking to maintain kind of open lines of communication to make sure that food policy councils and their partners have the most up-to-date, timely information about resources that can help and support them, and that we want to have an open door and hear about your needs and challenges too as they come up, especially in agriculture, as I think a lot of folks know in agriculture and food systems, that shared information flow is really important to making sure that things are working on the ground, whether it be markets and other associated value chain activities. So without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague from the Office of Partnerships and Public Engagement, Ms. Cherie Lesh. She's a grants management specialist with that team. She's been there for a few years now. She has tremendous experience with the program. Thank you, Cherie, for joining us.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cherie Lesh. I'm a grants management specialist for the 2501 program. That's the short title. The long title is the Outreach and Assistance for Socially Disadvantaged Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers. I'm sitting in for Benjamin Chan. He's the program director. He's out today, but I work with him and for him under this program. So we have a PowerPoint slide. Erica, were you going to bring that up? Thank you. So there it is, our title. And because it's such a mouthful, we like to call it the 2501 program. 2501 is the section under the regs that this program falls under. Next slide, please. The purpose of the 2501 program essentially is to increase access and awareness to USDA programs and services. It's amazing how many farmers and ranchers out there across the nation don't know that USDA has a lot of both grant and loan programs that they can access to help with their farming businesses. So we partner with nonprofit organizations and universities to try to get that information out to them. The 2501 program is a competitive grant program, highly competitive, because we don't have a cost sharing or cost match requirement. We provide funding, as I said, to organizations that help us get the message out about USDA programs. They also provide outreach, education, mentoring, and technical assistance for underserved farmers and veteran farmers and ranchers. Throughout the year, we solicit feedback from the individual farmers and from our grantee organizations, as well as other advocacy groups, to sort of provide input and guide this program the way it needs to be guided to serve our farmers and ranchers. Next slide, please. Well, up until the beginning of June, we had 45 million was our current funding level, but Congress rescinded the COVID-19 funding. I think we're going to have a little over 25 million for this funding cycle. All the organizations and universities that apply must present a proposal that will cover a period of 3 years. The maximum request is $750,000 for the 3-year project. As I mentioned, matching requirement is not existent for the 2501 program. We do accept only one proposal from each organization. So like if within a university, there might be 2 different projects that different professors are trying to, develop. We would only be able to accept one of them. We do have an external, we used to call it a peer review panel, but we felt the need to have some USDA personnel on the panel. So it's not comprised of solely peers of the applicants. It's both peers and USDA grant specialists. We do observe geographical diversity. We try to have projects spread out across the nation and to our US territories. Next slide, please. All applicants of the 2501 program have to be registered in both sam.gov and grants.gov. Registration in sam.gov is required to be maintained throughout the life of the award. Grants.gov is where you would submit your proposal. Currently, we have an open funding opportunity. It opened in April, and we accept proposals until 11:59 p.m. on the 25th of July. That is a firm cutoff time. So hopefully, if you were considering putting in a proposal, you would get it in well before that day. We have 3 funding categories for our eligible entities. Category 1 is the 1890 land grant universities, Native American and Alaska Native colleges and universities, and Hispanic serving institutions. Category 2 is essentially our nonprofit organizations that have a 501c3 designation from the IRS. Also in Category 2 are eligible tribal entities and national tribal organizations. Category 2 is our largest category. It is the most competitive category, but it is also the category that receives the most funding. Category 3 is all other higher education institutions that have an agricultural program. And organizations that do not have a nonprofit status can apply. They would be also placed in category 3. It's the hardest category to get funding under because, again, this program is so competitive. In order to be eligible, all of our organizations have to show documentation of their experience in serving our underserved farmers and ranchers or military veteran farmers and ranchers. Next slide, please. The term socially disadvantaged within USDA is different. In some programs in USDA, beneficiaries can include women. For our program, it does not, unless women belong to those categories mentioned above. So our definition of socially disadvantaged includes African American, Alaska Native, Asian American, American Indian, Hispanic, Latino, and Pacific Islanders. And women who fall under those groups are eligible beneficiaries. We have 2 other groups that are eligible beneficiaries under our program, and they are military veterans and immigrants and refugees. Next slide, please. The 2501 program has 5 programmatic mission areas. Any proposal that is submitted has to address at least 2. You don't get more points if you address all 5, but you, at a minimum, must address at least 2. So those programmatic mission areas are helping underserved and military veteran farmers and ranchers own and operate their own farms, improve their participation in USDA programs, helping to build relationships between those groups mentioned on the previous slide and USDA entities, whether it's local, state, or at the national office. We hope that our applicants will also try to reach our underserved farmers and ranchers in a linguistically appropriate manner. We'd also like them to help identify problems and barriers that our farmers and ranchers face when trying to apply for USDA programs and finding ways or solutions to minimize those problems. Next slide, please. This is a list of 8 unallowable uses for grant funds. This list has been created over the years concerning things that we've seen in applications. I don't want to read it to everyone. Hopefully you will be able to get a copy of the slides. But just some examples of unallowable uses are sort of trying to create a jobs creation program to use 2501 grant funds to pay like an hourly wage. That's not allowable. Providing small agricultural loans to individual farmers and ranchers, that's not allowable. Paying for fee-based courses, that's not allowable. Also, it is a non-construction grant, so grant funds for the 2501 program can't be used to repair building structures or construction of buildings or facilities. Also, large equipment cannot be purchased with 2501 grant funds. You can't buy vehicles or semi-tractors and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. A lot of times we get calls from the individual farmers and ranchers asking for assistance, and this slide gives some of the resources that we try to offer to them. That top one is our OPPE website. If you go on to that website, you will be able to see, I think it goes back to 2014, all of the projects that we have funded in the past, and probably more importantly, their location in each state and the contact information. So you can contact those individuals and perhaps partner with them in the future, or get an idea of the type of project that they carry out in their area. Next slide, please. This is our tiny but mighty staff contact information. As I mentioned, Benjamin Chan is our program director. Both Brenda and I are grants management specialists with the 2501 program. I've been with the program for 9 years now. Ben is new. He came on last year, but he has been with USDA for I believe over 15 years. Brenda has been with the 2501 program at least 10 years. So that telephone number that's down there and our email address is 2501grants@usda.gov. If you have any questions beyond today, we encourage you to use that 2501grants@usda.gov email address, because it's probably going to be the fastest way, especially when we're in a funding cycle, the fastest way to get your questions answered. Typically, we answer the same day, if not at least the very next day. So thank you all very much, and I look forward to answering your questions. Oh, I did want to say one more thing. We held our first open teleconference on the funding opportunity announcement on the 12th of June. Our next one is the 10th of July, and I will put a link in the chat as soon as we're done with the question period. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Cherie. If you have questions for Cherie, I encourage you to write them down, maybe even put them in the chat box. But before she answers those questions, I want to introduce to you Jim Hanna, who's the executive director of the Cumberland County Food Security Network, and his county is in Maine. His council was a recipient of the 2501 grant last year. And so I want to introduce him and ask him to tell us about the motivation to apply for the grant, what the grant application process was like, and how they used the funds that they received. Welcome, Jerry.
Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here talking about our 2501 grant. About this time last year, I was writing it. It was a pretty intensive grant writing process. A number of partners that we identified. I guess I should back up a little bit. So I direct a food security council based in Cumberland County, Maine, which is southern Maine. I've been doing food system work in Maine for almost 30 years now. Have had success writing a number of USDA grants in the past. Some of my work in the early 2000s involved forming an immigrant farming project in our state, working with Somali refugees and Latino farm workers. That program, the New American Sustainable Agriculture Project, is still in existence and has led to some, as an incubator farm program, has led to some farmers becoming independent, establishing their own enterprises. So done a fair amount of work in the ag space, ag development, farmer development, supporting the integration of people with farming skills into our local farm economy. One of the things that was identified very early on when we began working with farmers was they all wanted to raise animals. And that was a very challenging element, kind of hurdle to get over. We could access a little bit of land in trust for agriculture production, growing fruits and vegetables, but it became much harder to set up infrastructure for animal husbandry, raising animals for the meat system. And so after seeing the success that these farmers were able to establish with vegetable and fruit production, we are finally at a place where we could set up some infrastructure. We have one farmer in particular. He's actually part of our council and is also part of another network we participate in, Community of Learning and Practice with the Food Policy Network, but his name is Dawood Uma. He's in Turner, Maine. He has a farm where he grows goats and also does vegetable production. And we're turning his 10-acre farm into an incubator farm site, calling it the Uma Farm Food Hub. He already has a small custom certified processing facility in his huge barn. And we've had USDA visit to look at turning that into USDA certified. So we had those elements of infrastructure in place. He has additional stalls where people who want to learn to raise animals that don't have access to land can use those stalls, use his grazing land. And so we're in the process of working with some folks who don't have land access now to grow their own animals there, and then to use that as a training facility for animal husbandry and raising livestock, particularly small ruminants, because part of our community that we're working with are recent immigrants who are interested in goat meat and lamb. And so that's our focus in, let's see, the title of my project, our project that I'm the director of is, the meat value, growing the meat value chain for limited resource farmers. So we're looking at every element. So growing the animals, accessing land, processing the animals, and even developing markets. In another project, community food project that we have done some research around the markets around the animals, in terms of immigrant markets, focus. Right now in Maine, much of the meat that folks want is being imported from as far away as Australia and New Zealand, frozen lamb, frozen goat meat. And the crazy thing is, that's some of the, in terms of price, the most competitively priced meat. So it meets very basic needs, it travels a long way, but we're trying to build up our local meat system. As folks who are aware of the meat value chain noticed during COVID, there were a lot of collapses, a lot of breakdowns in the meat value chain. And so there's a lot of interest in building our local meat value chain. So members of our council were interested in just the food system in general, but specifically having more sovereignty over our local meat system. And so we have a lot of support from not just USDA service providers, but also other service providers in our state, like the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. They have a livestock specialist that's going to visit Dowd's Farm next week, talking about setting up training there with them. We've been working with NRCS and Cooperative Extension, and not just meat, but Dowd also, our state recently had an agriculture infrastructure investment program funding that they set aside 20 million of COVID funds that they granted. We had 180 million in applications for this 20 million in funds, and Dowd got a small grant to purchase a smoker. So he's going to be doing the smoked meat as well as smoked fish, which is another product in demand in our community here. So these are kind of the foundation of what we were able to put together for this kind of project. Again, working with socially disadvantaged farmers. So some of the immigrant farmers I was working with 20 years ago who've established themselves. I work closely with the Somali Bantu Community Association, help them write a few grants to USDA and to private foundations. They also work with agrarian trusts, and they have 100 acres of farmland in Wales, Maine, and they have over 200 farmers working on that land. But even so, they only have a handful of goats. They don't have they have the interest, but they need the training to kind of establish their goat operation as well. So again, we're going to use this project and use the resources we have to establish training on their site as well to help those farmers grow more meat and access more meat for their community. But working, this particular grant is Sherry mentioned, one of the really nice things about 2501, because it is intended to serve farmers with such limited resources, there is no match requirement. So it makes it easier to leverage these funds and to invest. Though we do have, as I mentioned, other investments from the state that are also bidding on it. We can't buy a tractor. We can't, build that infrastructure onto Oates Farm, but when we can get those state resources and have the support from other partners. I think we got a letter from the Department of Agriculture in our state in our proposal because of their investment in the infrastructure around the meat system that we've leveraged. So trying to think of what I'm leaving out. We are a food council. It is a 501c3. That's a really important element of all this. You do need to qualify, unless you have a fiscal agent that you trust a lot that can manage this level of funding. You really do need a 501c3 to be eligible for this. And I think it's important also to note that when you think about socially disadvantaged farmers, it's a pretty specific category. And we've been, as I mentioned, we're part of a learning community of equity and food sovereignty and food justice with Food Policy Network. So we're learning how better to elevate those voices, follow the leadership of those folks, those farmers, like responding to what they need and setting up the infrastructure to support what they need. So I think my time is up. Looks like Daryl's jumping in. So I hope I've covered everything that you wanted me to cover, but I'm open to questions as well.
Well, thank you, Jim. I think you pretty much covered it. It may be appropriate to add that Dawood is also military, so he also
He's a veteran. Yes,
he's a veteran, right? So he met that criteria as well. Okay, and so we've heard now from Cherie, who is helping manage the program, and we heard from Jim, who was a recipient of the program. And so if anyone has any questions, now is the time to ask your question. I saw one in the chat, so I'll open with that one. And then if there's others, then you can raise your hand or put it in the chat, and then we'll address them. And so Kathy Wood had a question for Cherie, and Kathy writes, would stipends that supplement housing and field costs during an apprenticeship, apprentices are employees of the farm, be allowable expenses? And would stipends to cover time the apprentices taking relative instruction also be permissible?
So you can pay travel and subsistence costs, but not housing costs. Even if there's a conference or a workshop that is in another location where the farmer or rancher would have to travel, it's at a distance, you could pay for a hotel for X number of farmers and ranchers so that they could attend that really important workshop. You could pay travel and subsistence, but no, we would not support housing costs.
All right, thank you, Kathleen.
I did want to kind of ask a question back on that one, because they said, apprentices were employees. So, how would you, if you're paying employee wages, you could put their personnel costs into the grant or, into the proposal. Depends on how many you would have.
To clarify, so we're the organization which is registered with the state of North Carolina, but the apprentices are not our employees, they're employees of the farm. So we don't cover their wages.
Oh, I see. Okay, then you wouldn't be able to, yeah.
I have a question. Now, how does the Food Policy Council, in their work, integrate into the programming? Am I asking that right?
Yeah, no, I understand the question, and that is a good question, because we are a council that has a number of programs. Once we became a 501c3, our community, we work in the schools. We have a project called Food Fuels Learning, which has actually worked in partnership with a number of schools to access farm to school funding. So for local procurement, nutrition education, school gardens. So that's one element of our work. We also have a gleaning program where we work with farmers and harvest excess produce in the field, which is separate from the meat project. We call it the Maine Meat Initiative, the overarching project for developing the meat system in Maine. So, we convened a council meeting yesterday where we networked and we heard from all the various folks in our community who are doing different food system work. It's a very diverse group. We heard from Wolfneck Farm, which is doing some really advanced agroecology. We heard from Malacca Project, which is distributing food to families at schools. Just very diverse range of work happening in our council. And these are the kinds of projects that have emerged as priorities in our community because of the need. And so that's why we've done additional work to raise resources and have staff to focus on that kind of work. So it's an interesting dynamic within our council. I don't think it's unique, but there aren't a lot of councils that operate with their own programs. I think more often it's a convening type of function.
So thank you for that question. I don't see any other questions in the chat box. So I'll ask a follow-up question to something that I heard from that I heard Cherie say. And so you talked about how it's possible to fund employees depending on how many employees there are. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on how many employees are eligible for funding.
Well, it's not really how many employees. Your budget would consist of major costs along. It's about 11 different types of costs. So you could pay personnel costs, fringe, but those individuals would be key project personnel. Obviously, a lot of people need administrative help and that sort of thing, and that individual or couple of individuals wouldn't necessarily be key personnel on the project, but they keep you up and running. So personnel costs and fringe are allowable costs. I was making reference to if you had like 20 apprentices, your $750,000 would run out very quickly, and you wouldn't have the funds to create the necessary workshops or training or pay for, traveling to farms and providing one-on-one technical assistance and that sort of thing. So, you'd have to tailor your budget within the $750,000 over a period of 3 years. So you really have to watch those dollars closely.
Excuse me. Okay. Thank you. And I think it's almost time to move on, but I just there's two questions. And so I'll read them both in the chat box and then I'll let you respond. And so the first question is there an average funding amount recommendation or within a range that you suggest applicants consider based on new allocations? And then the second question is, what are some of the most common things written into a budget for this specific proposal other than personnel?
Well, on the first question, what you really need to do is establish what the need is in your community. And if you determine that what your farmers and ranchers in your area who, could be statewide, it could be just a county or a smaller community, you establish the need. And then you create a project to respond to that need. If you determine that, it's only going to cost us about $500,000 for 3 years, then put in, your proposal for $500,000. If you think that, you can expand it and you want to spend $750,000 and your organization can carry out all the goals, that you're proposing you can do, then put it in for 750,000. You know, there's no average funding amount. We get all kinds of projects every year. And a lot of the projects, some of them are trying to help with land acquisition or land tenure. We have lawyers that work in nonprofits that try to figure out, you know, land title issues, that kind of thing. And then we have other projects like gyms and other. I mean, there's just so many different projects, even a project on teaching farmers and ranchers, you know, QuickBooks and how to automate their farming business. It's just whatever the funding will support and what the panel merits, you know, what project gets funded, you know, but the very important thing is that you establish the need and then you say how you're going to respond to that need. Some of the most common things written for the budget, you have, you know, personnel, you have fringe, you have contractual costs if you have subawardees, you have, let me look at my, I can't find it at the moment, but everything you need to run a you know, a business. You know, you're going to have overhead, you're going to have partnerships, you're going to have costs of workshops, cost of training, you know, that sort of thing. So there's, you know, if you look at the SF424, it will tell you what all the major costs are, and you categorize your budget according to the SF424.
Okay, thank you. And so I want to ask Jim, as someone who's done this, what things did you put in your budget, Jim, when you applied?
Well, we have a training coordinator who works with the communities to identify the training needs. And then, you know, there are things like supplies for trainings or supplies, you know, for setting up the incubator farm. There are limits on, you know, expenses of what you can spend for some of those things. Difference between equipment and supplies is an important distinction to make. So you need to look at the regs for that. Even things, you know, like if we want to demonstrate a certain type of fencing, mobile fencing, that can be in the budget to show other farmers how to set up, you know, different kinds of pasturing, how to move their herd around. So those are, you know, when you think in a broader way about, you know, what you need to help farmers learn and expand their businesses and build their enterprises, but also some of those legal costs too, and understanding land access. That's a really important part of it. It's not as much in Maine, but I know there's a lot of heirs questions in the nation around how people can hold on to their land, or if they've lost their land and they want to try to get it back. There's a lot of groups that work with farmers in that, because I think, you know, a really important thing that I keep in mind is this came out of the settlement with the Black farmers and their land loss. This program was originally created because of that. And so even though I worked with immigrant farmers and supported them, I understand that the base priority of this is really trying to support the farmers who invested so much to build this country, first of all, with slave labor, and then also once they actually became landowners and some of them began to lose that and had taken away from them. This is in some ways a reparation to help them reacquire and to get back onto the land. So, you know, that's a really important point to me that I don't forget as I'm doing this work, because in Maine, we have a very small population of people considered African-American. And in the past 20 years, the majority of those folks have become immigrants and refugees. So there's just a small number of actual Black farmers, so to speak. And so trying to build their capacity build that community. I think, and recognizing that we're not pitting anyone against each other, but certainly there are different paths to success, and folks that have been here longer have had more obstacles to face, and so need a little more support, I guess I would say.
Well, thank you for that. And so we have 2 more minutes in this section. And so if I don't see any hands raised, I don't see any more questions in the chat box, but this is your chance to ask a question to one of the people who is governing this program and another person who has successfully applied and is now implementing it. So I'll give.
I support Sherry's advice to work on it now, get it done early, make sure your SAM is up to date. I had a friend last year who was working on it, realized that their SAM had expired, and when they had to find a fiscal sponsor to actually submit their grant. They'd done all the work on the grant, and then they had to find someone to submit it for them because their own SAM had expired. So there's some elements of this that are very detail oriented that I think are important to make sure you read the application, the RFA, carefully.
And how long does it take to establish a SAM?
Well, lately, it could take up to 3 or 4 months. They've been backlogged for a very long time. They're trying to, minimize the time that it takes, but I don't know, Jim, what your experience is, but a couple of our grantees, I've actually had to get involved to, try to get their SAM account up and running after 3 or 4 months of, being stalled.
Well, and last year they redefined the number from, and I can't remember the acronym, but if people who hadn't taken care of that or waited to the last minute, that took some time to update. I think it's a unique entity identifier or something, what they call it now. Used to be something else.
Duns number.
The Duns number, right? So that was what preceded that. So if you hadn't updated that, I think that's what happened to my friend. So I hadn't updated that, but I just renewed, and it's a pretty intensive process just even to renew it, and then you're not sure until if you've done everything right. I got an email back with a bunch of questions, and so yeah, even renewing it, I'm not even sure. I think it expires tomorrow, and hopefully I've done it. I've done the renewal, but I'm waiting to see if there's any more questions. But at least I'm happy I'm getting attention, because as you said, it really backed up. So if you're new, you may be sitting in a pile somewhere.
Yeah, I just want to make one more point about the sam.gov account. You as an entity, you put your banking information into sam.gov. It's tied to our financial office. And so if your sam.gov account expires and we're trying to pay you funds, if you're trying to draw down funds, it's not going to come to you until you get that sam.gov account back up and running.
Mhm.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
That was an important piece of information we just covered there.
Yeah.
There's one last question. I just want to honor this last question, and it
Okay.
reads, can you use the funds to create a study lead by the Food Policy Council and contract experts to develop a study?
I'm sorry, but the 2501 grant is not a study or a research grant. There are other USDA grants where you can conduct studies and that sort of thing. But if you remember one of the slides, we have 5 programmatic areas, and you have to address those areas. We are not a research grant. So.
Okay, and we'll be able to have the slides that you presented?
I believe Alex was gonna post them in the chat, or Erica.
Sure, we can do that.
Thanks.
All right, fantastic. And so I want to give a big thank you to Cherie and to Jim. Thank you for your time and your expertise and your responsiveness. I want to pass it back to Alex, who can introduce Margaret Campbell, who will talk about the USDA Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production.
Yes, thank you, Dario, and thank you, Cherie, for that, and Jim for that presentation. It's very insightful. And now we'd like to pass it over to our colleague, Margaret Campbell. Margaret's the Senior Advisor at the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, and she's going to provide some info on a lot of the great work that that team has been standing up and leading across the country. Thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Alex, and it's a pleasure to be here, everyone, today. Thank you for the invite. So I'm going to try and share my screen. We'll see how this goes. Let's see. Can you guys see a presentation? Presentation. Right.
Margaret,
Yes.
you need to flip your display because right now we see your notes.
Yeah. Display.
At the very top, there should be something that says swap displays.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about this. Well, here, I'll just pull up a different version of it. So, in any case, screen. So I think you guys can see this roughly. So the Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production was created in the 2018 Farm Bill. And we basically have, in addition to kind of coordinating urban and innovative production support across USDA, we have 5 kind of key things that we focus on. So I'm just going to give you a broad overview today. We sit within the farm production and conservation mission area at USDA. We're housed within the Natural Resources Conservation Service. And one of the things our statute required was for us to stand up a federal advisory committee for urban agriculture and innovative production. So we're actually currently seeking members for this committee, this federal advisory committee. They will develop recommendations for the Secretary of Agriculture on how USDA can better support urban and innovative producers. They also advise our director, they evaluate research, and they just kind of provide overall guidance to USDA on how to kind of expand its services to a new class of producers that USDA is not that accustomed to working with. So you can see the statute requires members from 12 members from different backgrounds and expertise. So we're currently seeking folks with business and economic development experience, individuals who are urban producers, individuals in higher education and extension, and folks with related experience in urban, emerging, or innovative agricultural production. So the deadline to submit a nomination is July 15th, and I can send more information to Alex after to distribute, but we're really hoping to get a lot of candidates to kind of shake up the committee. This is the first time we're seeking new members. The other main thing we're working on here is setting up urban service centers in cities across the country. So the 2018 Farm Bill created pilot urban county committees, which are like the Farm Service Agency county committees, except they're dedicated to urban areas. And so to show USDA's commitment to serving urban producers, we are standing up urban service centers in all of the locations that have been selected for urban county committees. So those, we'll be making an announcement about that in the next month or so. And that list will go out publicly, but we do have urban county committees in 17 cities right now. There's an election every year. Any local urban producer living within the area of the urban county committee can nominate themselves or others. Can also vote in the elections, and it's a really great way to give feedback from folks on the ground to USDA headquarters about what kind of programs and programmatic changes are needed to better serve urban producers. So this is another great opportunity for people to engage with USDA and kind of guide USDA as it embarks on serving a new customer base. So you can see here, this is just kind of an overview of the responsibilities, but the county committee members work closely with FSA employees and leadership in the county just to make sure that services being offered match the needs of the local communities. So this is service centers. Another program that we have is our cooperative agreement program, composting and food waste reduction cooperative agreements. So these are open to units of local government. And the purpose of this program is to test strategies for municipal compost, especially and other food waste reduction efforts, but also looking for composting efforts that provide soil to local urban producers to kind of close the loop here. So the application period for this program unfortunately just closed, but we will, it'll be open again next year. And we think we have about $10 million that'll be going out to this. And so it's just a really great way for local governments to get the ball rolling on local composting efforts. I know New York City got one several years ago, and now they're rolling out, citywide curbside composting pickup. So it's a great way for local governments to kind of get started with composting and reducing food waste. So here's a little overview of the priorities. Obviously, if you create any economic benefits, side businesses like permaculture, make the compost easily accessible to gardeners and farmers. And if you combine it with food loss and waste prevention strategies, that's also favored in this funding opportunity. And I should add that you can collaborate with a unit of local government on this application. So even if, I don't think a food policy council would count as an eligible entity, but you could be the partner on an application submitted by a unit of local government. And then we have our urban agriculture and innovative production grants. This is by far our most popular program. It's a competitive grant program. It's open to nonprofits, schools K through 12, units of local government, tribal governments, and it supports planning and implementation grants that help local community gardens, small farms, food rescue organizations kind of get more healthy food out into their communities. So there is a priority in this funding opportunity for areas that lack access to fresh, healthy, affordable produce. And the proposals have to support multiple farms or gardens and address the lack of access to fresh, healthy food. So we're really excited to announce this year's recipients those should be coming out in about a month or two. And we anticipate this program will open again for applications early in 2024. So here's just kind of an overview of the planning projects and the implementation projects it funds. We kind of view this as complementary. Like you could start with a planning project, and when that grant is complete, you can then apply for an implementation project and kind of expand the project you have going on. And then we also have the People's Garden Initiative. I don't know if you ever visited USDA headquarters, but we have a garden on site there that was started by Secretary Vilsack. For the first time, he was Ag Secretary under the Obama administration. He jackhammered the concrete away from a parking lot to start this garden, and now it's a really great way for us to engage visitors and explain what USDA does. And we've also expanded it to allow gardens across the country to become part of the People's Garden Initiative. So the requirements are to join, grow, teach. So join by joining, we mean obviously sign up and join the People's Garden Initiative, but also join together with members of your community and each other to garden, which is kind of a cute way of saying it cannot be a personal garden in your backyard that no one else is gardening in. But so join, grow, gardens grow using sustainable practices and teach. The garden teaches visitors about growing food, gardening, sustainable food systems, and how growing your own food can contribute to a resilient local food system. So the gardens don't necessarily have to be food producing gardens. Most of them are, but even wildlife habitat or pollinator gardens are eligible to join because, as we all know, pollinators support food production and resilient, healthy local food system overall. So here's a little overview of criteria, and then you can go to People's Garden website, usda.gov/People's Garden, and there you'll find the registration form. Gardens can self-certify. If you sign up, you receive a People's Garden sign to display. You're listed on the People's Garden website, and then you get access to resources from across USDA in the form of webinars. We have monthly webinars for member gardens. We just had a composting one. Next one's going to be pollinators. So we bring together, experts from different USDA agencies and research institutions and our partners at Extension, and just kind of pull together all the expertise we can to help with your community garden. And we also have an Extension Foundation website where registered People's Gardens can kind of share their stories and best practices, and communicate with each other, kind of build a network and support. The gardens can support each other. So it's something we're really excited about growing over this next year. So really encourage you, if you have gardens in your community, to ask them to sign up to be a People's Garden so we can keep growing this program and the number of gardens that are affiliated with it. And I think that's all of my overview. I'm sorry for the difficulties with screen sharing, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
So thank you, Margaret. And if anyone has questions, please raise them. There's a question already asking that you could show slide 14 again.
This one? Is this the slide you were looking for?
We don't see it. I think you have to share your screen.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I did. Or is this one's the one listed as 14?
Is this the one? Kristen, she says, thank you. Christina Matson. Yeah, she said, thank you. That's it. That's the one. So are there any other questions for Christina? Are we able to have this presentation as well?
Yeah, I'll send it to Alex.
Okay.
Thank you all. I'll also include the link to our website, follow up to Alex and, the People's Garden registration information, and just reach out if you have any questions about the Office of Urban Ag and what we do.
Okay. So I was going to give people a few more seconds to ask a question if they have one. If not, then we will bring this to a close. All right, so I want to give a special thank you to Alex from USDA, Jim Hanna from Cumberland County, Maine, also Cherie, who presented about the 2501 program, and Margaret, who talked to us about the Urban Center. Also want to give thank you to Karen, who is making sure we're all connected and everything is governed correctly on this webinar. And I want to thank you all for participating and for asking questions and for attending and for just being here as we learn about these various programs. I hope you have much success in applying, and I hope you have a good day.